Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to Ribbon, a Center of Excellence, our Rock for Aging program. Today is our monthly webinar, and we're really excited to bring to you today Breaking the Chains, Economic Development and Domestic Violence. This month, our staff speaker will be leader moderating today will be Denise Drayton. Denise, come on board and introduce our speakers, and let's get started.
Thank you, Linda. So today we're going to start out with a welcome to all, as Linda did, and we're going to do a brief introduction of economic abuse, and we're going to have our first presentation on legal advocacy, and then we're going to do a presentation number 2 on survivor story. We're going to have a brief Q&A, and then we're going to close with a call to action. So we want to just start out with a video to just kind of give us an understanding of economic abuse in a domestic violence situation. Okay, so I'd like to introduce you to our first speaker. Her name is Lisa Lind R. Jacobs. She's the CEO of Just Solutions and former VP of Government Relations for Legal Momentum. She advises federal and nonprofit clients on issues such as racial gender, racial, gender, and economic equity, restorative justice, campus sexual violence, workplace protections for domestic and sexual violence victims, criminal justice reform, and related intersections. A recognized expert by the Women's Media Center, she's been featured in major outlets like the New York Times and NPR. Jacobs received the ABA's 2020 Vision Award and has authored and co-authored works on racial inequity and workplace violence response. Lisa, I give you the floor to talk to us about some long-term effects of financial control, sabotage on survivors, and some challenges faced by marginalized communities and barriers to economic independence. Lisa Lynn.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Denise, for that beautiful introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Lisa Lynn. I'm that odd person who does not have a preference. Jacobs. I use she, her pronouns. So happy to be here this afternoon with all of you from the ribbon. My personal privilege, very much like coming home, since I grew up in Prince George's County, Maryland, sort of the Temple Hills area. Next slide, please. Very appreciative of the way that the presentation began. I think it's given us a great context and grounding for what we're going to go over today. Economic abuse, as the intro shared, takes on a lot of forms, can impact people in a lot of different ways. It is also very costly, very expensive to us as a society. The one thing that I always find in doing this work is that the statistics tend to lag behind the work in a particular way, right? So the information I'm talking about is about 8 years old. So you might imagine that even though I'm sharing these statistics, these are before the pandemic. So these statistics are even worse post-pandemic as we await the federal government's lag in providing us newer statistics. But the costs of sexual and domestic violence are at this point significantly exceeding $5 billion in direct costs. Those costs are 70% medical, 15% in terms of lost productivity, 15% of that is lost lifetime earnings. And this final statistic shares with us that at least at that point in time, when this statistical snapshot was taken, 95% of the incidents of domestic and sexual violence occurred in households with incomes under $75,000. Now, that is a statistic that I'm going to imagine has changed significantly since the pandemic. If you think about the idea of people trying to work from home, being co-located with someone who might have been harming them, right? That phenomenon probably meant that there were an increased number of incidents occurring, and that the extent to which those incidents were occurring at all income levels, I think, probably also increased. Next slide, please. So again, I think that the video that we looked at in the beginning gave us a pretty solid idea of what economic and financial abuse are. I'm going to linger here for just a moment to share some things the audience may be familiar with. So there are about 3 major federal statutes, federal laws that address domestic and sexual violence. One of them is the Victims of Crime Act. The second, the Violence Against Women Act. And the third, the Family Violence Prevention and Services Act. As to that second one, the Violence Against Women Act, it was authored by now President Biden as part of the 1994 crime law when he was in the Senate. So VAWA was first signed into legislation in 1994 And somewhere between every 5 and 8 years since then, the bill has been reauthorized. People who advocate on these issues come back together periodically, look at the issues, ask what the successes are, what the needs are, what has changed, and how we can strengthen the bill. VAWA was most recently reauthorized in 2022 when President Biden had the unique, I think, experience of signing a law that he had originally championed as a senator. When he signed that bill into law in 2022, this definition that you are looking at on screen of economic abuse was added to federal law as a subpart, if you will, of domestic violence. So the Violence Against Women Act has a domestic violence definition, and economic abuse is a sub part of that. I'm just going to run through just a few things here very quickly, consistent with what we saw in the video. Economic abuse is behavior that's coercive and deceptive. It is behavior that restricts a person's access to money, assets, credit, or financial information. It's behavior that unfairly uses someone's personal economic resources, including their money, assets, and credit. So that involves a harm doer or an abuser using a partner's money, their credit, their assets for their own advantage and without permission of the person whose funds those are. Finally, economic abuse can show up in the context of someone unduly influencing someone's financial and economic behavior, including forcing someone into default, being harmful with respect to their other financial obligations, right? Forcing someone into debt, putting someone in a conservatorship situation where they are not controlling their own funds, or failing or neglecting to act in the best interests of someone. This says here, to whom you have a fiduciary duty, right? So if you are a caretaker for a parent or a family member, and you take over their assets, etc., and misuse them, that is covered within this definition of economic abuse. Next slide, please. So I wanted to run us very quickly through 2 slides. This is the first of them, just to give us a sense of what intimate partner violence looks like among women, and broken down into a variety of categories by race, ethnicity, and some other demographics. We can see here, right in the middle of the slide, that multiracial women experience among the highest levels of violence. That's nearly 64%. Black women at 53.6%. Asian Pacific Islander women are at the lower end there at 27.2%. White women are at 48.4%. Also represented on this chart are women with disabilities at 66%. Transgender women weighing in at half of them experiencing intimate partner violence, and undocumented or Latina women weighing in at 49%. Next slide, please. And I wanted to share some similar data for men. What we can see here is that Black men are at the highest end in terms of their lifetime experience of domestic violence. That's about 57.6%. American Indian Native men are at 51%. I would also say, vis-a-vis that last chart, that if you look at it closely, I think Native women are on there as well, and also tend to experience high lifetime incidents of domestic and sexual violence. Hispanic men on this chart, their lifetime experience is about 40%. Multiracial men at 51%. white men at 44%, and Asian Pacific Islander men at 24%. Next slide, please. So I wanted to, because we are talking about economics, and because if you are in a situation of economic stress or struggle, what you are often trying to do is to work your way out of it, right? If you have a job. And at that same time, your intimate partner or your harm doer is pushing you in the opposite direction, wants you to appear to be unstable in the workplace, wants your workplace to be afraid of you in the sense that they're afraid that your partner might show up at the workplace and act out, right? Or might threaten violence, etc. So I wanted to spend a couple of minutes talking about what this economic abuse situation looks like in the workplace. So these stats tell us that more than a quarter of women have experienced intimate partner violence at least once, a little under 20% for men, that transgender people are more likely to experience domestic violence, more likely to believe they're negatively impacted by this kind of violence at work, but less likely to discuss it in the workplace. Next slide, please. So here's some things that will show up or that you will see if you imagine that 25% and more of women have experienced domestic and sexual violence, there is a significant likelihood that one or more of those women are in your workplace, right? And here is how those symptoms, if you will, how that situation might present itself. You could see someone whose work performance changes. Maybe it declines over time. Maybe they are tardy more frequently. If an abuser is bringing their harmed partner to work, they may on purpose try to make them late because, again, they want the employer to view them as being unstable. They, would prefer almost that the harmed person be fired, because particularly if the harm doer has a job, the harm doer wants to maintain control over the harmed person and their finances. And if the only source of finances a harmed person has is getting it from the harm doer is generally good with that, right? You might also see someone in the workplace who has unexplained bruises or injuries. And as a result of this situation, someone might either resign or be fired as a result of this instability or the other kinds of things that I talked about, right? The harm doer showing up in the workplace. Next slide, please. You also see absences, right? Harmed person might need to go to court to get a protection order, might need to take time off, and may or may not, I'm dropping a footnote to say, right, may or may not have paid time off to do that, may not have time off at all, may need to get locks changed or medical care to do safety planning or relocate. There, as a consequence of what I just said, right, they may not have the leave. So they may have to take unscheduled or unexplained, they may have unscheduled or unexplained absences, or they may call out from work unexpectedly, which again makes them look unstable to an employer and jeopardizes their employment and their ability to be economically stable. They may be late a lot for the reasons that I just shared. It may be that a harm doer keeps them up late at night, again, because they want them to oversleep or otherwise show up late and look unstable. There may be safety challenges. Next slide, please. So in a workplace, sometimes, a workplace can be someplace that you meet your intimate partner. And if both of you are in the workplace, in very predictable ways, the person who is experiencing harm is much more visible in the workplace, right? They're the one who's coming in late. They're the one who needs to take leave, maybe unexpectedly. They're the one whose partner is showing up in the workplace. The harm doer can be in the workplace as well, but their actions are much less visible. They are equally as problematic in that context, they're just not as visible. So this survey was actually taken of harm doers. 80% of those folks who were harm doers and doing that in the workplace said their own job performance was being negatively affected. Nearly 20% said they almost caused an accident at work because obviously they were more focused on the harm doing and harassment than on their job. Also, it is often the case that supervisors are aware of what harm doers are doing, but don't confront it or admonish the person doing the harm, which of course emboldens them to continue doing this and causing a problem in the workplace, not only for the person who is being harmed, but for others in the workplace, including the employer who's relying on the harm doer to get their work done. But as I just shared, right, harm doers often distracted and paying attention to other things. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share just a couple of resources, and then I'm going to take a final moment to wrap up and talk about some particular situations and impacts here. One resource I want to share is that the Violence Against Women Act that I talked about before, it actually funds this entity, which is called Workplaces Respond to Domestic Violence. It's the National Resource Center on workplaces. It's to help employers understand how they can support their harmed employees, because I probably shouldn't have to say the obvious, but most people who are being harmed in the workplace are good employees, right? They're trying to show up, they're doing their job, they are basically fighting against things, trying to be productive, right? And many employers recognize this and want to support their employees and know how to do that. So this is one resource for that. Next slide, please. This is just another picture of what you would find on the landing page of the website. It would, give you the opportunity to check out facts, figures, and information regarding client or coworker support. Also, if you're an employer, you can go there and it will help you put together a workplace policy. A policy that says, if I have an employee who has domestic violence issues, here's how I will support them. If I have an employee who is perpetrating domestic violence, here's how I will hold them accountable. Next slide, please. I wanted to share also with you the website for UJIMA, which is the National Center on Violence Against Women in the Black community. Next slide, please. On their website, in among other places, the research section, you will find information on the issues we've touched on today around domestic and sexual violence in the workplace. Just a couple of other things I want to run through quickly in my time with you. I think, I fairly well covered some of those tactics around economic abuse, which is really that a harm doer is trying very hard to interrupt a survivor who is attempting to become economically stable, because when that survivor is stable, then they can begin planning to leave a relationship. So often, very common economic abuse tactic shows a harm doer trying to keep a survivor from working, monitoring, what the harmed person is spending the money on, running up debt. Another common tactic is a harm doer will take out a credit card in the harmed person's name and run up debt or hide their assets. Sometimes the harm doer will force the harmed person to turn over their money from their check and then not make it available to them. There are also issues like financial isolation, right? Trying to ensure that the survivor remains financially dependent on the harm doer, or that the survivor can't, you know, focus on issues like education or vocational training, which again might help get them to that point of economic stability where they could contemplate separating from a harm doer if that's what they wanted to do. Now, I do want to drop a footnote here. You know, situations and relationships are all different. Not all people who are harmed want to be separated from their harm doer. Some of them want the abuse to stop. They may be co-parenting. There may be other situations. I just want to point out, right, that it is not always the case that when someone is in a situation of intimate partner violence, they're not always trying to leave, but they may be trying to get some economic stability that is harder to accomplish when a harm doer is isolating them and engaging in these tactics involving economic abuse. If we are talking about a harmed person who wants to leave, among the things they may face after they leave is trying to rebuild their credit, trying to get housing. And if the abuser has been making them appear financially unstable, making it so they have to leave a job, etc., their credit may be in shambles. And if that's the case, getting housing or an apartment is going to be that much more complicated. And if they have to leave a job because the harm doer shows up at their office and acts out and jeopardizes their employment, they may have a problem getting, another job. So very, very quickly, in terms of the impact on the communities that I know Ribbon serves, right? Particularly Black, Indigenous communities of color, right? The LGBTQ community. These are communities that may already be facing systemic barriers, including in discrimination, housing discrimination, employment, trouble getting or keeping or maintaining a job, right? So these particular situations involving economic abuse compound the experience and the discrimination and the bias that those communities are struggling with. There can also be structural barriers like inequitable pay, right? Folks not getting the same pay, which of course is going to make it that much harder and longer for them to achieve stability. There can be not enough access to legal protection. In my line of work, we find that all the time. People need help getting a protection order or something else, and there just are never enough lawyers or advocates doing that work. The social safety net, as we know, SNAP, TANF, some of the other social supports. The amounts are never, adjusted really for cost of living. And as we know, if you are talking about folks who are receiving those kinds of benefits, they typically run out in the middle of the month, right? Long before the need runs out. And finally, just a note about encouraging folks who are working with people in the community who have these needs, just leaving you with the understanding of the importance of legal advocacy, right? Looking at know your rights documents to help you understand what rights and protections you have if an employer is discriminating against you, for instance, because you're a survivor, right? Many states now have on the books laws that say employers cannot treat you differently or fire you if they find out that you're a survivor, right? You also need to check with lawyers and advocates around issues involving divorce, custody, restraining orders. All these kinds of things have economic implications in the near term, but also going forward if you're talking about, again, trying to rebuild your credit rating, trying to rent a house, with just your name on the lease or mortgage or things like that. Denise, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I'm looking forward to my colleagues' presentation and to questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Lisa Lynn. That was so comprehensive and so well done and very clear. And I got a lot out of it. Um, thank you again. So now I'd like to introduce you to our next presenter. And this is Myra Franks. Myra Franks is the fourth of 7 children born and raised in rural Alabama. She's the mother of 5 children and has 7 grandchildren. Look at how gorgeous she is. She started her educational career earning an associate's degree in office administration and continues to learn and grow as a community liaison. Her HIV journey began in 2001, but she lived in silence and fear for a decade after joining PWN Positive Women's Network USA in 2018. She dove into advocacy work, seeking justice for people living in rural communities. Myra is a Ribbon Ambassador, 2023 member of PWN Alabama chapter, I believe AL chapter, currently their outreach coordinator and past secretary for the chapter. She's also has she's also worked with reproductive justice for Black Lives, and she's an ambassador for the state of Alabama. She graduated year 5 of the PWN USA Policy Fellowship, and she also engages in outreach and hometown organizing projects climate team and her gender justice team to help ensure resilience in rural towns in Alabama. I please give your undivided attention to her survivor story as she talks about the impact of daily life, emotional and psychological toll, and the role of supports for survivors of domestic violence and economic violence. Myra? You have to unmute Myra, baby.
Sorry about that. But good afternoon,
Okay.
everybody. I'm so glad to be here with you today. And yes, there is a lot of psychological and other mental stuff that goes along with the trauma of being abused. My first incident of abuse happened when I was around 18 years old. I got involved with a man, and before I know it, he literally had me locked in the house. Bars on the windows. There was an iron gate that he locked every day. And a lot of times I was really young and I didn't understand the impact of what was going on in that situation. But and I don't want to talk for him, but clearly he had other issues going on, and I basically escaped. I jumped out of a second-story window to get out of that relationship. And with that, if you're not getting out, you can't take care of yourself. My second relationship, well, it's not the second relationship, but another abusive relationship, it lasted for years, on and off. He would like to take me to work. And that caused a lot of problems with the people there, the accusations that went along with that, just like Lisa Ann said, my work productivity went down. I was working at a call center and I was actually number 4 on the floor. But before I knew it, I had lost that position and eventually just left the job because he was always there, kind of hanging around, wanting to know, checking my phone, one thing, things like that. Kept me isolated from friends. He talked about he knew things about the people that I was around, hanging around with. He knew more about the people that I worked with and other people in my circle than I did. So the controlling, the accusations, and there was some physical abuse associated with that situation. And it was off and on for years. I didn't know how to get out of it. There was one incident where he had got really brutal and I left and went to a shelter. I took my young girls and we stayed in the shelter. I made the mistake of getting in contact with him while I was there. I didn't stay a month, but the statistics show that people in abusive relationships, they can go back several times before they finally break those ties, and I was one of those people. I went back to, and things were good for a while and got back on my feet. I went back to school, but a lot of the stuff that was going on, it was still present. He was coming to the school, making sure I was in class, like there was a lot going on with him at that time. During that time, I had a regular doctor's, I went to go see my gynecologist, and I just had a test done, and I came back positive for HIV. I had been doing well, and when I went and told him, I was literally in tears because I was thinking it was my fault. When I told him, he said to me, well, we all got to die from something. And it did not register with me. This man, he never went to the doctor to be tested until he got sick. So, and that was part of the control. He would say to me, you're mine. He would go out on the road and say he was working. I guess he was working. I did see a check stub, but he was not bringing money home. And that kept me in some type of mental anguish. We had bought a mobile home, and I had to give it up because I was doing all of this by myself, He eventually took ill, and he passed in 2012, and relieved maybe because I'm not bound in that situation anymore. I could not have other relationships, especially with men. He would show up, he would find me. I did go out of town some, to live, but when I come back home, he would find me. I moved back home, he'd find me, and he'd just show up at my house regardless of what was going on. It was a really crazy time. It was really insane. But that's how that relationship ended, and I was actually his caregiver. And during that time, I basically gave up everything, and to follow him on the journey of his last days, because I knew that somebody had to be there with him having the virus. Okay, after all of that was over, I faced a lot of stuff. There were some credit cards in my name that he had used out on the road. I actually have 2 domestic violence charges, on my record. When they come out now, they arrest both parties, which was crazy. He was attacking me, and I went to jail. Just getting up on my feet since then, because of some of the trauma that was associated with that relationship. I got a job. I did get a job at a shelter. It's amazing how God brings things full circle. The same shelter that I had went to, I went back to work as a relief worker. And it was a good experience, but it could be kind of taxing. Just like I had stated, sometimes the person that is experiencing the abuse comes back. And I saw a lot of women. It was like a revolving door. And I thank you, Lisa Lynn, for talking about how domestic violence, it affects men. I also saw men come through the shelter. A lot of people think, especially in this area, that that's a man. He can't be abused, But a lot of men, they suffer from that too. If they didn't have the space for them in the shelter, it was like a 3-story house in a disclosed location. undisclosed location, and they would pick people up from the hospital and bring them to the shelter. But sometimes they would put people in hotels, or else they would find some of the other relief workers to take them to their hometown if it was feasible. Yes, I do. It was so much. And while you were talking, Lisa Lynn, there was a lot that was going on within me, because it has been taxing, and the trauma that you feel in those relationships, feeling like you're alone, feeling like you're the only one, wanting to go but can't, for different reasons. People, women and men too, they do this for different reasons. Oh, my sister, she was killed in a domestic violence situation. The family did not see it coming. My sister Amy, she had just graduated from college, earning her bachelor's degree and working at a post office in a major city here in Alabama, and she was abducted from the post office, taken to her home, held hostage, and when she escaped, she was killed. It was hard for me to find closure in that situation, because he killed himself also. And it took a long time for me to really process it, even though almost immediately our family decided that we would be proactive, and we created a scholarship, the Amy Lynn Franks Memorial Scholarship, here at our local college, that will give a small scholarship to someone going into a field that serves people who experience domestic violence. Yeah, but like I said, it took me a really long time to process that situation. Everybody, including me, thought that would be my story. But not only was it affecting me, it took me about 6 months before I was able to do anything. That was my baby sister, had a kind of somewhat of a nervous breakdown, and I self-medicated really bad during that time. But not only did I lose a sister, my mother lost a daughter, her children, they lost their mother. It was a great loss. And I even had to come to terms with that domestic violence situation, the abuser, his mother lost a child too. So it's been a journey. It has been a journey, but I just want to encourage anybody who is going through any kind of domestic violence, whether it be physical, emotional, verbal, financial, take care of yourself. Get out of the situations. The resources are there to help you. At the shelter where I worked, they had emergency housing, as well as if you came into the shelter, that was the emergency, or else go to a hotel or something, that was the emergency part. And then they had long-term shelter, and they would help you get into housing. They had counseling. They offered daycare services, everything that you need to get back on your feet. And a lot of people, they don't know a lot of these services exist. And we feel isolated. I can speak for myself, because you don't know until you know. And you gave us a lot of information. I would like to get that information and share it with some of my networks, because it's something that we all need to know. Domestic violence is real. The trauma is real. And not only does it affect the person, but it affects the whole family. Thank you.
Thank you, Myra. That was so brave and courageous of you. Thanks for sharing. I know that was particularly emotional for you. I can feel your passion, and it's very difficult. I'm also a survivor of domestic violence, so I certainly do understand what you were sharing and what you were going through. And for those that are online, please know that this might have been particularly stressful or emotionally distressing to listen to. And I would encourage everyone to, reach out to your support system or your mental health services or wherever you go for care to, speak about it, if you need be. And at the end of this discussion, we have some resources that you will be able to reach out to. I'm going to leave it up on the screen, but right now, I'd like to open the floor for any questions or thoughts that people would like to share. And at this point, because the group is intimate, you can unmute and speak.
This is Roxanne Caleb, and I just want to say, Myra, thank you so much for sharing your story. It was heartbreaking, to be honest, and but I think what got me is when you said you had to also consider that the person who killed your sister, his mother had lost a son. Most people would not be that compassionate to think of that. So, there's a lot that you went through. I'm glad to see how well you're doing now. And I thank God for that. And also, Lisa Lynn, thank you for all the information that you shared. That was very informative, really very informative on some of the resources that you shared. So thank you very much. I just want to say thank you. This has been really great.
Oh, thank you. This was Minister Roxanne Caleb. And she is very dedicated to informing the faith community about domestic violence, and she's been giving a couple of series of informational sessions of her own that helps helps the faith community know what role they can play, and her sessions have been very informative, and I thank you for your support, Minister Caleb. So if there are no questions, okay.
This is Melanie Reese, and I'm going to talk to Myra in a minute. Lisa Lynn, I wanted to know what compelled you to go into the work that you do.
It's interesting when sometimes people, because I'm a lawyer, right, they want to know questions about my career path. I wish that there were a logical explanation for all of that. All I will say is, I could say several things. I'm a minister's sister and a minister's daughter. So sometimes the Lord has plans for you. That's one way of answering the question. But I worked as a fellow or an intern for my first year out of law school at a women's rights organization, and I still work on a variety of women's rights, intimate partner violence issues. But in 1995, when I was 5 years out of law school, I went to work for the U.S. Justice Department in their policy office. And that was less than 6 months after the first Violence Against Women Act had been passed. So a good chunk of my work then was working to implement the Violence Against Women Act. And that particular law has more or less been in my work portfolio ever since, right? I was at Justice for 5 years. I did some consulting for a number of years. Then I worked for a nonprofit advocacy organization and had it in my portfolio. And although I left them now 8 years ago, I hung out my own shingle as a consultant, and the Violence Against Women Act is still in my portfolio, right? The way that I keep my arms around the work or keep engaged as I keep taking on different substantive areas, whether or not it's economics or the specifics of that experience in the community for Black women and girls, or the criminal justice pieces or the campus violence pieces. But I think it is something, either if I am not called to do it, it calls me nevertheless.
Mhm.
And so here I am.
I so appreciate whether it was called by God or that your work is priceless. And you imparted so much information that I'm a domestic and intimate partner violence survivor, that in hindsight, if I knew that, I may have prepared an exit plan sooner than I did. But your work, I commend you for doing your work, and I so appreciate you. And Myra, I love and appreciate you. You are so open about your life story that it is a healing for people who feel um that have no power, to hear that you went through it. And I know all the work that you've been doing since. It's inspiring that you can go from low to high and impact people's lives by your story. I love you.
I love you too.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Okay, so I just wanted to share a few resources. All of this is available. I will find a way to have it up and available if you can see it. But these are some toolkits and networks that are specific to helping survivors of economic abuse and domestic violence, but specifically economic abuse. And it's out here for us, and if we can be better advocates and help someone out of a situation, then that's probably the best calling that we could have. So I'm going to turn it over to Linda if she'd like to exit us out. If not, then I will ask Shauna.
Great. Thank you very much, Denise. Ladies, thank you very much for being with us today. This was a very informative webinar. I thank our guests. I thank the intimate group that we had today as audience. And I thank everyone who would take the time to look at this on our channel. Please don't forget to visit Ribbon at ribbon3.org, or visit us also at our rockforaging.org website. We look forward to seeing you in future months as we continue this work together, united with you. Have a great evening, everybody.
Thank you. Bye now.